All right, so last week we talked about Jesus' announcement to, remember? It was announced, his birth was announced to Zacharias, right, Zacharias, who was there in the temple in the hour of prayer. I want to jump back to Luke chapter 1 this morning. This is the announcement that we most frequently think of when we think about Jesus' birth being announced, was his announcement to Mary. I'll precede all of this just by saying that this to me is, along with Zacharias' announcement, of greater coolness, if I can use the word, I'm not sure it's the right word, to me, is not the announcement itself, but the fact that we know about the announcement. You think about it. Now, Luke begins his gospel saying that he had basically researched it. When did Luke come into the equation from a Christianity perspective? We don't know, but we see him in the middle of the book of Acts with the Apostle Paul as a Christian, as one of Paul's traveling companions, as well as the real first historian of the church. But when did he get saved? We don't know. He wasn't a follower of Jesus during Jesus' earthly ministry that we can tell. There is no apostle named Luke. And so, Matthew and John were both written by apostles, and yet Mark and Luke were not. Mark had been a failed understudy of Paul, a successful understudy of Peter later on. And then you have Luke, who was Paul's traveling companion, but not an apostle, not present like Matthew and John would have been for much of Jesus' earthly ministry, but not present certainly for Jesus' childhood. Nobody was. And so you read about the detail that we get in Luke, and what we see is a guy who says, look, I talk to people, I know, I've done as much research as I possibly can. When you hear Zacharias' story in all of its detail, understand that the only place he could have gotten that was from one of three people: Zacharias, Elizabeth, assuming that Zacharias told her, or John the Baptist, assuming that Zacharias had told him. But John the Baptist didn't quite survive Jesus' earthly ministry. He got beheaded before then. And so in all probability, he had talked to Zacharias or Elizabeth, or maybe Mary if they'd related the story to her. Luke chapter 1, as we continue in verse 26 is where we're going to get into today. What is very clear is that Luke interviewed Mary, Jesus' mother, because the things that he records, he records things that nobody else was there for. Nobody else was present to observe. The Magnificat, as it's called, Mary's song that we're going to look at, it was something that she and Elizabeth were the only two people there to have witnessed this. Luke certainly wasn't. And so the fact that he has it, and has it in such remarkable detail, tells us that he had talked to Mary and or Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth was older than Mary, considerably older, and so it's not impossible or even improbable that all of this came directly from Mary. But for me, that's just cool. Here's a historian going back to Jesus' mom and talking about Jesus' childhood. Talk about a guy who probably could have filled several books with what he heard. Because you can only imagine, here's Mary talking about her son, understanding that she's a Christian, understands he's the Savior, but still he was her son. I am sure there were those humorous moments, those stories that any mother would tell of their child that he skipped over. And John closed his gospel by saying, look, if the sky were parchment and the seas were ink, we might have been able to get a good start on Jesus' life. There's just too much to write. And so there were some choices they had to make, what to include, what to not. Why did Luke not include? Why did everybody move from birth to ministry? Because that's pretty much the motif in each of the Gospels. He wasn't trying to chronicle Jesus' entire life, just establish him, and then here's the ministry. And so there was a purpose and a plan in his writing, but I wonder how much more he knew than he was able to write. I mean, you always have to edit. I was thinking this morning, I'm running here late because I'm trying to condense, all of my thoughts into something that I can hit in 30 to 45 minutes here. Just editing, self-editing down. Okay, what is the critical piece of this? What is the most important? What can I communicate in the time allotted? And Luke had that same as any author, writer, speaker, communicator does. They have to edit down what's the essential piece that I can get out. For me, it's very cool to look at this and go, wow, here's a guy who actually talked to Mary. It's the only way he could know this is if he'd actually sat down with Mary and she recounted these events to her. So kind of with that as a preface, we'll jump in at verse 26 of chapter 1 of the Gospel of Luke. Now, in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a city of Galilee named Nazareth. The 6th month of what? Whose pregnancy? No. Elizabeth. So you have to, even though we're beginning kind of in the middle here, you have to, keep this in its context. If you were to go back, the context before this, the couple of paragraphs before this talk about Zacharias' announcement, talk about John the Baptist, talk about Elizabeth being pregnant, about Mary going to Elizabeth's house. So there's a lot of going on here we're kind of stepping into. But understand the 6th month here is in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, even though, John the Baptist has now been born. Luke is reaching back a few months from where he left off in 25. All right, so do we understand this betrothal, espousal concept? Is this new? What in the world? Oh, Kate's phone. Because I don't want to overlook it. The Mary and Joseph's relational status at this point, they were betrothed or espoused, depending. The idea of betrothal is akin to our idea of engagement. And I say akin to because it's not the same. They were engaged, but in this period in history, a betrothal was an actual legally binding arrangement. Just like marriage today is a marriage covenant, it's a legally binding arrangement. So it's betrothal is actually a step somewhere kind of between engagement and marriage. We don't have a step in between. They didn't have a step that preceded it, but it was just that one element. It was legally binding. In order to break up at this point, you would have to actually get a divorce because you were legally bound, even though you were not relationally bound. There was no conjugation of the verbs, if you know what I mean. There was nothing going on there, but it was still a legally binding thing. I remember the day after my marriage, I woke up, and it suddenly dawned on me that I could no longer just break up with Kate. That was a startling revelation to me, day one of my marriage, to go, wow, I can't just break up with her if we have a fight. Now we're kind of stuck. It's been a good stick. Don't misunderstand. But that was just kind of, and it's the same kind of thing here. They're legally bound to each other. They're not married, and all of the rights and privileges and responsibilities that go with that, but they are almost married. So that's the relationship status they were in.
And the angel came in unto her and said, Hail, thou art highly favored, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou among women.
This is one of the few places. What does the angel usually say to everybody first off? Yeah, don't be afraid. Fear not. Hey, just calm yourself. Gabriel does not go there. Interestingly enough, that this visit, for whatever it was, Mary wasn't shocked enough to be afraid, or Gabriel was too excited to worry about whether or not she was afraid. I'm not sure which it was. As an angel, you've got to think, this is the coolest. I get to make this announcement to this person in this moment in time. Had to have been cool. So he comes in and he salutes her with this great, rejoice, highly favored one. The Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women. That has got to be a strange salutation. I never say that to anybody, especially a pregnant mom, Granted, she wasn't here yet, but still, that idea, wow, this is, usually angels go, hi, I'm Gabe. No, pull yourself together.
I think he was excited because he saw the woman that would be carrying the Savior.
It had to have been cool.
Don't angels every single time, so they always say, when God, don't be afraid.
That's like the first thing they always say. And the reason they say that is because,
They look crazy.
right, we're afraid naturally. When we see an angel that is clearly an angel, the first thing that we want to do is pee our pants. And so the angels are always like, hey, don't be afraid. Because if you needed to be afraid, you were dead before you knew the angel was there.
It's written that the angels are always in the full presence of God, so their face are reflecting God's light.
Yeah, I mean, now, not all of them. Paul said, some of you have entertained angels unaware. I think that we have, witnessed angels, probably each of us in our lives, not knowing it. But yeah, when an angel appears in angelic form, have you seen the cartoon Rose is Rose? Do you know this cartoon? Have you seen the little angel that goes around with Rose through many of his journeys? When that angel flexes, suddenly it becomes like, 4 stories tall and glow in the dark, nuclear, That's kind of, that's the full-on angel effect that I think the cartoonist captures really quite well there. Very fun to read. So if you haven't read it, Rose is Rose. It's a very, very cute. Not quite as robust to me as Calvin and Hobbes, but, it gets pretty close.
I like the Walter itself.
Yeah. And so, an angel almost always says, hey, don't be afraid. And this angel skips that. It's just like, hail, highly favored one. That had to have freaked her out, you would think, but she seems to have taken it in stride. So where are we getting to? 31. Yep.
And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bring forth a son, and shall call his name Jesus.
He will be great and will be called the Son of the Highest, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David.
He shall reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there shall be no end.
So do you think Mary has any ambiguity, question marks about who this child is supposed to be? Yeah, I mean, this is to a halfway literate Jew. This is immersive. This is immense. The prophecy here. You're going to bring forth a son. He'll be great, be called Son of the Highest. He's going to be the Son of God. She got that. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. He's Messiah. This is not even unclear anyway to her, and he's going to reign over his kingdom forever and ever. There will be no end. Wow. And so Mary's natural first question, 34.
And then said Mary unto the angel, how shall this be, seeing I know not a man?
Okay, so the whole he's going to be Son of God thing, the whole Messiah thing, the whole King of the universe thing, fine. I'm kind of a virgin. How's that going to happen? She's interested in the mechanics of it, going, betrothed, pure, question. So this, and it's interesting, very human remark that, you skip over all of that to go, but I'm, I'm just this young, pure Jewish girl. I don't know a man, never known a man, kind of. Yeah, the mechanics of it, God's got it. Look at this picture of everything you're going to have. I don't get it.
And kind of like, I think we see it a lot too. Like when these big things happen, we don't even see this moment. We kind of don't realize it. I think it probably happens a lot when you lose somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, you overlook, you tend to focus on probably the most concrete thing. Okay, I'm going to have a son. I don't have a husband. How's that work? Come again? Because taking in, you're going to have, the Son of God, the Messiah, the King of the universe. That's a lot to take in for anybody. And so she focuses on the one thing she can actually probably wrap her head around. Husband, never, no. How's that work? And so, it's a very honest response, a very human response. Let's see, we get verse 35. I don't know who's this. Okay. So the fact that Mary was a virgin was part of why she was chosen, because this was not a ordinary conception. This was not going to be, God working through a person. This was going to be, the term we assign to it is immaculate conception, clean conception, conception without a dad. God doing something miraculous, starting life in the womb without a paternal contribution, as has been the norm. And so God said, yes, that's part of the point. Is this a miracle? Yeah. Has this happened before, since, or again? No. Are miracles hard to wrap our head around? Yes, because it's something that God does that defies and is outside of our normal experience.
So it was actually prophecy, right?
Mm-hmm.
When it would happen, it's really that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So do you think that Mary was at all knowledgeable? Because I know, I'm not sure. Do you think she would have had understanding of
I think so.
the scriptures of Isaiah?
Yeah, I think so. I think, we look at the ancient world and we try to figure out, okay, how much did, women know? And yet, most women weren't educated and all that. But within a devout home, even if a woman isn't taught to read, there is so much Bible that a father was obligated to share. You get into the feasts and the festivals, and there were readings, and there were prayers, and there were stories that they were obligated to share. And in a devout household, that would have been more. And God, how many times throughout the Old Testament did God say, make sure you tell your children this, make sure you tell your children this, make sure you tell your children this. And when they ask you about it, here's what you teach them. We see that kind of pattern throughout the Old Testament. So, even if we assume, okay, very, patriarchal society, women weren't taught to read, although that wasn't always the case. Women weren't allowed, to participate in synagogue, which was pretty much the case, though they were in attendance, just not participation. All of this, she still would have had an awareness. And I think, when I think of Mary and I see, her response and her, her knowledge, when Gabriel's message alone assumes knowledge. I assume when I say you're the son of the highest, you know what that means. I assume when, that you're favored by God, you know what that means. I assume when you say that, you're going to have, he's going to have the throne of his father David. There is an assumption there that the angel doesn't have to tell her what that means because she understands it. And so there is a certain amount of knowledge that he assumed she had that I don't think he would have assumed if she didn't have it. So yeah, I think the prophecy, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear. Yeah, I think she knew those. And I think that there was among the devout Jews, among those who were still looking for Messiah. One of the things that historians have observed about this particular period in history is that just there was a general sense in the Middle East that a great king was coming. And it's been documented that there was that sense, but not why that sense was there. So there was this kind of underlying expectation that people had begun to feel, not necessarily cognitively aware of it, just you kind of knew that something was coming, didn't know what, didn't know why they knew it, but there was just this sense of expectation. And so you think about, with the prophecy, virgin shall conceive. How many girls in Israel, up until the time of their actual marriage and consummation, didn't wonder who that might be and could it be them? Because up until the time of that consummation, they were eligible to fulfill that prophecy. And you wonder, and we don't know. How many girls went to bed at night and kind of dreamed of, God is going to do something really special through a young girl at some point. I'm a young girl. It just, and we're projecting back, obviously, but still incredibly cool. Yeah.
I know obviously Joseph is in the house of David, right?
Well,
in a lot of it.
yeah.
I'm saying I can't remember which one, but like maybe it's Rahab, I think.
Yeah, Rahab, yep, wasn't, because David was. Those were all in David's lineage.
Mary's also that's
Right. Anybody coming out of David's line has that same history. So yeah, there were several actually. You have Tamar, you have Rahab. There are a couple of people in David's lineage that you look at and you're like, wow. My father-in-law actually has a message or a series of messages that he preaches that God can hit a mighty lick with a crooked stick. And it's specifically about, I mean, you look at the people who are in David's line, thus in Jesus' line, and there are a lot of really messed up people in there that God was still able to work through and do something incredible in bringing Messiah through all of that. So yeah, very, very interesting study to look through. Genealogies are never boring. They may not be exciting to read, but they are incredibly exciting to study. And that's where you would find something like that. So yeah, absolutely. All right, let's jump to, so verse 35, this is going to be the Son of God, and so that's a miracle. Verse 36.
Now indeed, Elizabeth, his relative, has also conceived a son who will live. And this is now the 6th month of her who was called barren.
For with God, nothing will be impossible. And so you think about it, here's the coolness of what God is doing. Does Elijah have to come before Messiah comes? Zacharias, he's going to be born, and he's going to have the spirit of Elijah. Jesus would later say that, the teachers were right. Elijah had to come before Messiah came. And Elijah came already, and they did to him whatever they wanted to, indicating they had killed him. So, there has to be the forerunner. Has to come. It's prophetic. Has to come. And so God reaches down and he grabs Zacharias and Elizabeth. They're old. They are childless. And God says, I'm going to do a miracle here. You're devout. You love me. You're going to get to bear the forerunner, that Elijah, that's going to come before Messiah. But God, in his infinite coolness, made them family. And he reaches down and he grabs Mary's cousin, a much older cousin, but still, a relative. And so Mary's question is, how can this be? And God says, you remember Elizabeth? Yeah, my cousin Elizabeth, she's great. I love her, crazy old girl that she is. And God says, yes, she's 6 months pregnant. That probably caught Mary off guard because she was well past the age of childbearing. And so Mary's like, wow, my cousin Elizabeth's 6 months pregnant. And God said, yeah, because with God, nothing's impossible. So Mary, you need a little confirmation. Not that she asked for it. How can this be? Because I said so. And I choose when people have babies. It is not completely natural selection. This is a divine thing. And your cousin Elizabeth, she's pregnant because I can do it. And if your cousin Elizabeth, who is well past childbearing, is having a baby, I can handle this. And so he gives this confirmation, this sign, but in the intricacies of how God works, it all weaves together into this really great tapestry of, see, I'm doing what's prophesied over here, doing what's prophesied over here, and I'm making them work together so that when you need an answer, I delivered it 6 months ago. How cool is that? It's amazing. All right, so we have time to go. Good. Verse 38.
Mary said, behold, the handmaid of the Lord, be it unto me according to thy word. And the angel departed from her.
Here's a great question. Mary says to the angel, bring it. I agree. I accept. That's what that statement is. I accept. Did Mary have a choice? What if she said no? I mean, this is completely hypothetical because she didn't. Okay, I'll buy that.
Let's say this way, though. Let's say that she didn't have the faith to receive this, and that she knew that the scorn is with the stone. And so rather than that, what if she was really seriously couldn't handle
or just say no. Right. She couldn't. Right. Right. So, and that's really it is a rhetorical question. It's a hypothetical question, rather. Could she have said no? I believe the answer is yes. She could have said no. But, as Pastor Carl mentioned, God chose her because he knew that she would say yes. Right. As Joey mentioned, there's, and we're not really going there, but there is a whole lot of baggage that accompanies this. She is not married. To be pregnant is a problem. It's a problem with her dad. It's a problem with her husband. It's a problem with her town. She could be very well walking around with the red letter, the scarlet letter, or she could have been stoned. Absolutely. Joseph would have been well within his right to stone her. He was within his right to divorce her. He had a lot of rights. She had none. She was completely at his mercy and the mercy of her father. And culturally at her, her village, her town, the people who knew her. So, yeah, there is a ton of baggage that goes with this, and yet God knew that she was going to say yes. That doesn't invalidate the choice on her part, though. That's the whole point of this, to see it was a legitimate, her acceptance. Okay, I accept this. The fact that God knew she was going to say yes doesn't change the fact that it's still her prerogative to say yes or no. There was a lot with this. What's that? Exactly. And so, I want us to see that because that's consistent with the nature of God. He knows what we're going to say, but he doesn't say it for us. And that's the hard part to wrap our head around. God knows stuff before it happens, but he doesn't make it happen. And the analogy I always use is this. Have you ever seen the tractor trailers that have on the back of their truck, behind every bouncing ball comes a running child? Yeah, and it's kind of like a traveling PSA about, pay attention if stuff enters the road, understand there might be something behind it. Living here on 140, I've seen it, ball goes in the street, kids start running for the street. I shriek like a child at that point to stop, anything to make them stop. Because what people drive down here crazy speeds, you'd be shocked. We've had clocks caught people doing 90 on this road. Yeah, they don't like it, but we've talked to the police. So it wasn't me. Yeah, so they do, and so what they do, that's because as a driver, you see a ball bounce out in the street, a child may come. Say, for instance, you are one of the many people who walk along the sidewalk here. You see a ball go out in the road. You see a child chasing it. You see a truck coming. Can you do all this math in your head and know seconds before it happens that kid is going to get hit by that car? You just see it. Ball, child, car. And were this all to come together at one moment in time, could you see, before it happened, could you know with certainty that kid was going to get hit? No. I think you could. You could go, okay, that kid is just, two in the street, cars going too fast, not going to happen. And you could know, even though you were not involved, you're a spectator, you could know with a really high degree of certainty. And in theory, because this is theory, you could know with almost surety that something was going to happen before it actually did.
It's like when you hit somebody in the face with a ball. You can see it happening.
Right, no, right. So there are things that we can know and see. And Chris, I get you. This is very theoretical.
No, I understand. It's never, nothing's ever 100%. It's the 98% chance that, yeah, he's going to get hit.
Right. And we're certainly hoping so. But before we get mired in the illustration, let me get to the end of the illustration. And so even as people, we can know with high degree of certainty, and we'll say a near probable 100% certainty of what's going to happen. The question is this. You know it's going to happen. Did you make it happen? No. But kid runs in the street, car hits kid. 2 seconds before it happens, it's going to happen. With near probable certainty. Did you make it happen? Or did you just know it was going to happen? Okay, that's the foreknowledge of God. That he sees. Now, granted, he has that benefit that we don't have, is that he is timeless. He is outside of time. He sees the future and the present and the past all at the same time. But there are things that happen that God knows is going to happen, but just because he knows they're going to happen doesn't mean he made them happen. You see what I'm saying? And that's the point. You can never push if you push any metaphor too far, it will break, including kids running out the street with cars. But the point is, even as people, we know things that are going to happen before they do. Granted, not very far. 2 seconds is not a lot of lead time. But we, even with our limited experience and our limited awareness and our limited knowledge, can occasionally, with pretty high probability, see things that are going to happen before they do. We don't make them happen. We just know they do, or know they will. That's the same, foreknowledge. So when we talk about a person's ability to choose, understand, God knows a lot of things that are going to happen, but it doesn't mean he makes them happen. He just knows they're going to happen. He has a greater perspective, greater awareness, and greater knowledge, higher degree of probability, like 100%, absolute knowledge of what will be, but that knowledge does not in any way invalidate our choice. He knows what we're going to decide, but he doesn't decide it for us. Bless you. It's a legitimate choice. And so Mary here going, I accept this, absolutely an exercise of her will that God knew she was going to make. And so you see the sovereignty of God and the volition, the free will of man working seamlessly together to bring about a desired result. It doesn't compromise God's sovereignty, doesn't compromise our will. It works together. Bob. I don't know that I go with that last part so much. But yeah, God had made the decision because God knew how she would respond. Hey, buddy. Right. Exactly, yes. And God does guide us, clearly. But he guides us still within the context of our free will. And so we just need to not lose that. We're being evaded, so we do need to stop. But let me close this in prayer. Father, we thank you for the day. Lord, I just thank you for the opportunity to jump into your word and to see you in all of your sovereignty and all of your glory be elevated, because your sovereignty is not at all broken up by allowing us to make choices and decisions. Lord, it's complex. Help us to wrap our minds around it. Help us to wrap our hearts around it. Help us to love you more because of it. Father, as we meet in this hour, would you meet with us? Would you receive our worship? Lord, would you help us to receive your word so that we can go out into our world who desperately needs to know about you? Thank you in Jesus' good name.